Hey guys, I just finished a book that's really good and gloomy called All We Shall Know by Donal. It takes place in a small community in Ireland and is about a woman whose strained, spiteful marriage has just ended because she's pregnant, and the father is a 17-year-old boy she was tutoring. There are also a lot of passages about this woman's father, who was always belittled by his wife, and now is an old man who spends most of his days waiting at the window hoping his daughter will visit. It gave me serious Long Day's Journey into Night vibes, which is a play about family members who can't help but ruin their own and each other's happiness whenever they're together. And the experience of reading this and the feeling I got from it inspired me to make this recommendations video. I had to draw a line somewhere, so here are some of my most memorably sad novels. If I included, like, plays and memoirs on this list, it would never end. Let's be real, I read a lot of depressing books, but some have left me with a persistent ache, and as soon as I think about them, I feel that way again. The really scientific way that these books made it onto this list is that whenever somebody else brings one of these up, I make this involuntary sound, like a I'm going in order from the earliest read to the most recent. So one of the first books that ever destroyed me emotionally was The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. I read this when I was 12. I had just recently learned about the basic mechanics of sex, and this is a graphic book about a young girl who's raped and murdered and how her family goes on with their lives afterwards. I have heard people criticize it since then, but my 12-year-old self thought it was incredible and traumatizing. Then there's Anybody Out There by Marian. This is part of her series on the Walsh sisters, who are 5 fiery Irish women, and this one is about the 4th sister, Anna, although you can read it as a standalone book. In general, Keyes is a super funny commercial writer, but there's a twist in the middle of this one that makes the whole book so desperately sad. My sister actually gave this a 1-star rage rating on Goodreads because she was so mad about how emotional it made her, but I loved it. There's a depth in here that there isn't in a lot of Keyes' other books, and I think she totally pulls it off. Next is The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. I didn't love this at the time, but I've loved thinking about it in the years since. It's about a man named Newland Archer who's part of elite New York society in the 1870s, and he's pretty content with the life laid out for him until he realizes that there are other lives he could lead. Then I have The Tiger's Wife by Thien Obreht. This is about the psychological toll of the wars in the Balkans and follows 2 mythical stories, one about a deathless man and the other about a deaf-mute village girl who befriends a tiger. I didn't love this one as much as a lot of the others on this list, but where it's good, it's really good. One of my absolute favorite books is The Crane's Dance by Meg Howrey. It's about a ballerina named Kate whose sister has a mental breakdown, and then Kate herself slowly breaks down. This has a lot more humor in it than most of the books I'm mentioning, and it's that combination of humor and despair that I love so much. Next is the novella Beside the Sea by the French writer Véronique Olmi. This was the first book that Pairini Press ever published, and it's about a poor mother taking her 2 young boys to the seaside. If I had to choose the most depressing book on this whole list, it would be this one. I closed it like, oh God, like we should all be in the fetal position every day of our lives. Then there's On Chesil Beach by Ian McEwan. This is a really short book that takes place in Britain in the 1960s and is about a couple on their wedding night and the things standing between them and happiness. Sex education is important. That's all I'll say about that. Next is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, Queen. This takes an uncompromising look at the price of white supremacy in America and is partly about a little black girl named Pecola who dreams of having blue eyes. It's devastating. And on the more commercial side of literary fiction is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste. I found this book hypnotic, read it in a day. It's about a girl named Lydia who drowns in a local lake and is told from the perspectives of her whole family and exposes their resentments and misunderstandings. My heart felt swollen when I finished it. Then there's The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. This follows an old English butler looking back on his life of service as his trade is becoming obsolete. It's about the wishes and regrets that he can't even admit to himself. Such an elegant, wonderful book. Another popular one is A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. This follows two narrators, a Japanese teenager named Nao who keeps a diary, and an American writer named Ruth living in Canada who finds this diary washed up on shore. Nao is such a phenomenal, memorable narrator, and there are sections in here about bullying and loneliness that are brutal to read. Next up is Purge by the Finnish writer Sofi Oksanen. This takes place in Estonia and is about the Soviet occupation there and the Eastern European sex trade and family betrayals. If this book doesn't depress you, you should look into that. Then there's Ruby by Cynthia Bond. This follows a woman returning to her old southern town and is about the legacy of rape and lynchings of Black people in the American South. It's lyrical and heavily relies on magical realism, and there's a scene in here that scarred me for life. It's well written, but a hard book to read. The next three I'll mention briefly because I talked about them in my favorite books of 2016 video, which I'll link below if you want to hear more about any of them. So they are Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeleine Thien, which is about the Chinese Cultural Revolution and classical music, a YA book called One by Sarah Crossan that's narrated in free verse by a girl who's a Siamese or conjoined twin, and what am I doing with the book? Bodies of Light by Sarah Moss, which is about a very unhappy Victorian family. My last two suggestions are books I read earlier this year. So one is The Lowland by Jhumpa Lahiri. It's one of my absolute favorite books of 2017 and follows two Indian brothers as their paths diverge politically and personally before tragedy brings those paths together again in an unexpected way. Gorgeously written and a total downer. And the last to mention is Midwinter by Fiona Melrose. It's the story of a father and teenage son who haven't communicated well for years after the death of their wife and mother, and it really captures the small ways that people can hurt each other and how hard it is sometimes to express the deepest love you feel. So there you go. I hope you're inspired to get out the whiskey and red velvet cupcakes and read yourself into an emotional stupor. Let me know what you think about any of these recommendations and tell me which books have really triggered your sad buttons. Bye guys. Thanks for watching.